Hello and welcome back to Scottish Independence Podcasts. This week's podcast is all about the anniversary of Hiroshima and Nagasaki and the horrific bombs which fell 81 years ago this year. We have covered this before, so obviously it's an anniversary. It happens every year. So we're going to try and bring you something a little bit different, plus the ceremony itself, which is quite an emotional one to watch, I think.
And it's got some different speakers from year to year, hasn't it? So
yes, it has. It's quite uplifting, and it's quite nice to see how the Peace Garden's come on since it was created last year, and it really, really has come on, hasn't it?
Yeah. Before
we get to that, there was a webinar which was jointly organised by Scottish CND and UK CND. They've done a few webinars. This one, they had two very interesting speakers, and we've got some very short clips from their presentations. The first clip we're going to show you was a piece of academic research from a researcher called Hugh Irving.
Yeah, he's a scientist, and he's been doing research looking at the sort of potential scale of devastation, loss of life, also spread of radioactive fallout, were there to be a nuclear attack on the Clyde Naval Base at Faslane. And, I suppose from the point of view of CND, Scottish CND putting this on, it's to raise awareness about the reality of, what it would actually mean if it happened, and hopefully bring more people into the fold of supporting CND. It was quite a sobering.
It's hard hitting, but when Glasgow CND have been doing stalls, they have found that a lot of people, particularly young people, are not aware of what's on the Clyde, and they're certainly not aware of the threat that it presents to, well, not just the biggest city in Scotland. We kind of think of that, but as you'll see from Hugh's work, potentially much more extensive than this. Now, we will say at this point that this is the hardest hitting bit of this whole episode. It does get more positive after this, but there's no point in pretending this is not a serious threat to the world as we know it. So let's go over to Hugh and let him explain it.
All nuclear weapons and the entire fleet of nuclear-armed submarines carrying these missiles are based in the Clyde Naval Base and surrounding facilities, which is only 40 kilometres from central Glasgow and is surrounded by other populated areas such as Greenock and Helensburgh. The base was constructed in the 1940s during the Second World War. 4 Vanguard nuclear-armed submarines are operated from the base, at least one of which is always at sea and ready to launch its weapons. These Vanguard-class submarines replaced previous Resolution-class submarines carrying US Polaris missiles in the 1990s and are planned to be replaced by the new Dreadnought-class submarines in the 2030s. As the UK's only nuclear weapons base, it's among the most likely targets in the UK in a nuclear exchange between NATO and Russia. Even in a relatively limited counterforce exchange, destruction of the Clyde base would be a high priority to reduce total NATO nuclear forces. As well as being a strategic target, the base poses significant accident risks to local populations. The Clyde base and submarine programme more broadly have experienced numerous accidents over the years. Now, reports summarising these accidents from the Nuclear Information Service called Playing with Fire covers many more of these accidents than I have here. The submarines themselves have experienced many fires and reactor-related incidents throughout their service lives. And they've also collided with other vessels, most notably in 2009, when a nuclear-armed submarine actually collided with a French nuclear-armed submarine in the Atlantic Ocean. There's also been 2 nuclear weapons loading accidents in the Clyde base, where nuclear weapons were dropped from cranes, though these were both in the 80s. Whistleblowers, including former submarine engineer William McNeely, have reported lax safety security procedures on the base, leading to frequent accidents and security breaches. The design of the Trident warheads themselves also present safety concerns, as the warheads surround the third stage fuel tank rather than being in a payload section ahead of the tank. Even UK military operational documents acknowledge the proximity of the warheads to explosive propellant as a notable potential hazard. And release of radioactive material to the local waterways through an accident or into the local atmosphere through fires is an ever-present risk for nearby residents. So the scenario I chose to examine in my study is a strike on the Clyde base's associated Coolport armament depot. An explosive yield of 100 kilotons was chosen. This is the yield of several relevant Russian weapons listed here. It's also the same explosive yield of the UK's own naval warheads, so results could give some idea of the potential human cost of UK nuclear use. The weapons are stored in underground concrete reinforced bunkers, which require a ground burst or detonation at ground level to destroy them, as opposed to an air burst, which is used to destroy cities, and you might be familiar with from accounts of the nuclear bombing of Japan. I'm sort of labouring this point as ground bursts produce much more fallout and project this radioactive material high into the atmosphere, where it can be dispersed widely by winds. This is a particular concern for attacks on the Clyde base, as there are nearby cities and high local wind speeds. Also, a 2-on-1 strike was simulated, where the target is struck by 2 weapons. This is a well-known strategy in nuclear targeting of high-priority targets, as weapons can fail or be intercepted. So, for example, this figure shows the fallout dispersion for the historical weather condition with the highest number of fatalities out of the 100 simulated. We can see the fallout being dispersed to the southeast over central Glasgow, and small amounts even reaching as far as Newcastle, resulting in a total of 138,827 fatalities. Over 99% of the fatalities in these conditions are from exposure to fallout, resulting in short-term casualty from radiation sickness and long-term casualties due to cancer. Just under 800 fatalities are a result of the initial detonation, and this remains constant between simulated weather conditions. This map shows the maximum fallout radiation dose from all simulations. So at each location, the colour represents the maximum radiation dose observed in any one of the 100 simulations overlaid over population data. So we can see large doses of radiation potentially reaching Glasgow and surrounding population centres such as Greenock, Paisley, Stirling, Edinburgh and Dundee. In a few cases, significant fallout is spread to Aberdeen and Newcastle. Smaller doses are spread all over the region, reaching as far as the English Midlands, the Isle of Man, Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland.
That's sobering indeed.
It is sobering. And in the current context of people bandying around, all these men bandying around all these militaristic statements and calling it defense, where actually we're talking about aggression and horrific loss of lives with even one of these things. So you don't need to understand the science behind what he's saying to look at the colours, those diagrams. I mean, that shows you, and it's a big enough problem on the Clyde, but this is massive.
I mean, I was a bit surprised that there was only 800 people actually killed in the initial blast. And then, of course, there's, nearly 200,000 affected in other ways. But it's difficult, isn't it? Because, someone could be watching this, listening to you and I, what we're saying here, and say, well, yeah, but look, there's a madman in Moscow, and to which you could add there's another one in Washington. So in a way, you have to have, it is a defense. You have to, have something to stop them kind of attacking you, and you kind of think, yeah. But that argument sort of falls on its face, doesn't it? Because if you've got a madman, they're not going to act rationally. So
we'll come on to the narrative and a counter argument to that in the next clip. It's human, I think, to be so scared of it that you don't think about it. Because could you actually go about your daily life aware that you've got this ever-present threat? But the thing that I think particularly struck me when I first heard that was when he said that having those weapons on the Clyde makes the Clyde a really prime target.
Yeah.
This is us being the bit on the map that is going to be aimed at. Not with our consent either. This has been being done to us by our position in the UK as well as the world.
If you're still with us after that, well done. And yeah, we're going to move on to something a little bit different now, aren't we?
Yes. Now, this comes from the same webinar. I should say the whole webinar is on YouTube if you want to watch the entire thing. It's about an hour and a half. Our second clip from that webinar is from another academic called Rhys Crilley.
He's a lecturer in international relations at Glasgow University, and he's author of a book called Unparalleled Catastrophe, Life and Death in the Third Nuclear Age. I know it doesn't sound like it's going to be any less sobering than the previous one, but actually what he says is a bit so. Let's listen.
Yeah.
We're living in dangerous times. The risk of nuclear weapons being used or nuclear war breaking out have returned to heights not seen since the Cold War. This current era that we're living in of increased dangers and risks is often referred to as a new or third nuclear age. And this term has gained considerable traction in academic and policy circles, with analysts drawing attention to the increasing complexity of contemporary nuclear politics. And when we talk about this third nuclear age, these academics and experts and policymakers, they point out that the era that we're living in is different to earlier nuclear ages that have come before, because now we see the emergence of multipolarity and great power competition, tensions between and conflicts involving nuclear armed states ranging from Ukraine to Iran. We see emerging and disruptive technologies and the collapse of long-standing arms control treaties. So there's all this horrible stuff going on. And yet, despite these growing and diverse dangers, the response from nuclear armed states has been remarkably consistent. They argue that because the world is becoming more dangerous, nuclear weapons have therefore become more necessary. So a recent paper that a colleague and I have published in the journal International Affairs explores what the rise of this third nuclear age means for nuclear disarmament efforts. And here we set out to do some research, and we were essentially interested in asking how are governments talking about nuclear disarmament in the context of the third nuclear age. So I thought I'd kind of step back a bit and take a look at what's happening at the diplomatic level in how states are talking about disarmament. And the study we did, we looked at how we analysed over 100 statements made by governments at recent non-proliferation treaty meetings to see how they talked about things related to this third nuclear age, whether that's geopolitical competition or arms control collapsing, etc. And we looked at how they mentioned disarmament in this context. And we've got three main findings that I think are important to talk to you about today. So the first is that nuclear weapon states and their allies have developed a remarkably consistent narrative about our contemporary moment, where despite their differences, the nuclear weapon states all focus on growing geopolitical rivalry as the defining feature of this third nuclear age. And this development is repeatedly used to argue that now is not the time for nuclear disarmament. Instead, the governments of nuclear weapon states essentially say, we all want a world without nuclear weapons, but first we need a better security environment, and until then, we must modernise our arsenals and strengthen nuclear deterrence. Disarmament therefore becomes something permanently deferred. It's always the goal, but it's never actually the tangible policy. And this creates what Professor Benoit Pelopaides at Sciences Po in Paris calls nuclear eternity, the sense that nuclear weapons and the crises of today will always exist, because the conditions for eliminating them never quite arrive. And the second finding is that this dominant story about the third nuclear age leaves out something incredibly important, because if you only listen to nuclear weapon states, you think that our contemporary world is entirely defined by confrontation, crisis, and conflict. And of course, there are huge crises and horrific conflicts involving nuclear weapon states taking place today, but that's only half the story. Because at exactly the same time as the crises that define this third nuclear age have come into being, we've seen the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons enter into force and gain the support of a global majority of states. So now, across the world, a majority of states reject nuclear weapons and want to see them eliminated. And there's now a legally binding treaty that commits these states to that end. Alongside that, we've seen growing participation in nuclear disarmament advocacy by states and civil society. We've seen a renaissance of prominent media and culture that draws attention to the harms of nuclear weapons. And we've seen scientific cooperation in understanding the harms of nuclear war and risks. And a plethora, growing expertise and research like Hugh's that really dives into, okay, what would the use of nuclear weapons look like? But what I'm trying to get at here is that, in other words, the third nuclear age is not only an age of renewed nuclear competition, it's also an age of renewed global cooperative efforts towards nuclear disarmament. And the problem is that these developments are rarely treated as defining features of the time and the era that we're living through. And perhaps our most surprising finding concerns states that support nuclear disarmament and the TPNW, because whilst these states strongly defend the treaty and argue that today's dangers make disarmament more urgent, they often describe it as something that's outside of the third nuclear age, rather than something that actually helps define it. And I think this matters because if disarmament is always presented as existing outside of today's strategic reality, it risks appearing as sort of separate from real security politics. And the argument here, therefore, is that current nuclear disarmament efforts and things like the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons are not external to this third nuclear age. They're one of the defining political developments that's happening in it. So what does this mean, to wrap up, for those of us campaigning and those of us who want nuclear disarmament? I think there's three implications. The first is that we shouldn't concede this language of the third nuclear age to those that argue for more nuclear weapons. The term doesn't have to belong to nuclear strategists and people that advocate for deterrence. And second, when people say that we're entering a more dangerous world, we can agree. But we can remind them that this is exactly why nuclear disarmament is needed, and it's also why the global majority of states now support the abolition of nuclear weapons. And third, I think we can tell a fuller story that captures the big picture. The third nuclear age isn't simply a story of rivalry, conflict, and arms racing, because when you look beyond the great powers and the nuclear weapon states, it's also a story of effective activism, of legal commitments by a majority of states to never develop nuclear weapons and work towards abolishing those that do exist. It's a story of diplomatic and scientific and civil society cooperation, of survivors' voices being heard, of people being mobilized and growing international support for eliminating nuclear weapons. And I think if we leave those developments out of the story, we unintentionally reinforce that idea that nuclear deterrence is the only realistic security strategy for today's world. And of course, to wrap up, the third nuclear age involves very real, very present and very terrifying dangers, but it also involves a new momentum for disarmament. And I think the challenge for us is to harness that momentum and shift the debate to change policy and work towards a world without nuclear weapons. So thank you very much for listening. And yeah, Sophie mentioned the book, and I thought I'd just mention it again. But if you're interested in kind of a critical perspective on this third nuclear age, then please do take a look. Thanks so much.
Yeah, I appreciated that. It's good just to put it in that bigger perspective, isn't it? And I mean that treaty, the one for the prohibition of nuclear weapons, that's the treaty that Bill Kidd, who is one of the speakers going to be on shortly, he's been campaigning for that and working with that with one of the other supporting groups, ICANN, for years now. So it was good to kind of get that into the perspective on it. Yeah.
And I think the idea of changing the narrative, that's really quite empowering, isn't it? Because I think putting that third nuclear age, there was a time of possibility of actually fixing this mess rather than just piling up more and more things which you cannot ever use. I mean, when you think of the resources that go into creating a nuclear stockpile and that whole industrial military complex, it's madness. It makes no sense at all in a world that's struggling with a climate emergency.
No, you're wrong. You're wrong there, Fiona. It does make sense. Or rather, it makes some people a lot of money.
Well, there is that.
It gives the military industrialization complex, whatever it is they call it, that they make huge amounts of money from it, really. So that's one reason for doing it. Of course, no one would ever say that. Really, it's to defend the realm. I mean, one of the things that I think came out in that CND, Scottish CND webinar was, just the fact that if they were going to attack the Clyde, it really what they only need, the minimum would be that they just want to destroy the docks. They want to make it unable for the submarines to either get out if they're still there, or get back in if they happen to be out at the ocean. I'd, in a kind of ironic kind of way, I kind of said, oh, well, that wouldn't be so bad, would it? Because, well, you could do that with you don't need nuclear weapons to do that. You could do that with conventional, missiles. But then, of course, if there was a couple of submarines in the dock and you drop missiles on them, you're probably going to damage that all, and that could then set off a nuclear explosion. So in the end, I decided, well, it might be it's not like you have to destroy Faslane and Coulport. They don't need to do that.
If you hit the weapons store at Coulport, though, it's not just destroying the dock, you're back to those scenarios that
well, that's
Hugh
true, but I mean,
us.
it's these weapons, these missiles that come in are accurate. I mean, they are going to hit what they'll aim them at, and Coulport is a little bit away and it's over the hill a bit, but yeah, it's true. It would still be a catastrophe. It might not be quite the catastrophe that Hugh Irving was talking about, but it would still be very, very bad.
Yeah. We will put the link to the full webinar in the notes. Personally, I find small clips like this is about as much as I can cope with in one go when we're on this topic. But we do think it is important that we realise, first of all, that these things are there, but also that's only one side of the discussion. There is another side, and albeit all the, as you say, the wealthy, and it's almost all middle-aged white men, isn't it, who are benefiting from this. I think if you had a whole load of women in charge, we wouldn't be having this discussion.
Yeah, we'd all be over at the UN getting rid of them. Yeah,
we would. So that is that's the first bit of our show this week. The actual ceremony itself, the memorial itself, was in two parts. A vigil was held at Faslane. Neither of us were able to be at it, but we did get some photos from some people who were. So for those who've never been to Faslane, this first one gives you a flavour of what it's like. When it's guard turrets, barbed wire.
It's not really something that the Dad's Army people would really manage to get past, would they?
No, and it's not the kind of place that makes you think we have your well-being at heart either.
That's true, actually. That's true.
We have done it. There's been a few events that I've been to standing in front of those gates. And on the one hand, it is quite empowering being there, just because as a human being, you can make a protest just by being there. But then also at the back of your mind is what's behind you, and you think, "Oh God, this could go up at any minute." It is a scary place.
Yeah. I mean, the police obviously thought they needed to just pop along and make their presence felt. So there was a couple of it's a police van, so and a couple of cars really. So not loads and loads. They probably know that they're not going to get any violence along there.
Yeah.
But.
It would have gone home empty, that van, I'm sure. But nice that they turned up just in case.
Well, yeah. Okay, and then some of the some other photographs. So they obviously, people who were there took a while to get all the banners put up. What does that say? Remember Hiroshima, Nagasaki, never again. Yeah.
And then no nuclear weapons, not at Lakenheath, not in Scotland, not anywhere. I mean, I do wonder, there's only a handful of people maybe turn up at some of these things. It's quite difficult to get to, apart from anything else. There's some of the protesters. And you wonder, though, if you work on that base, do you look out at these people and think, they're just loonies? Or does it make you stop and think, am I doing the right thing? I don't know. I'm not sure. That's Samuel Rafanell-Williams from Scottish CND. So not just old ladies, as you might have taken from that shot. There is a mixture. We have there's been all under one banner events there as well. Which, you kind of think, what can I as one human being do in the face of all this? But sometimes just turning up, creating a small spectacle, many, many more people will know about it because of social media and because of taking photos. So it is worth doing.
It's interesting. It's interesting what you're just wondering about. I wonder what the people who are working in there are, think about it. And actually, what came to when you were saying that, and I was saying, well, yeah, I mean, I hope that does have some impact, and and probably there's other things as well, like they need a job, and it's presumably it's the reasonable paying jobs, whatever it is they're doing, and that brought to mind, sorry, our beloved Dame Jackie Bailey, whose whole argument, is we shouldn't do away with nuclear weapons because think of all the jobs that would be lost.
I mean, I just find that astonishing. It's a bit like the whole, okay, I know it was a terrible genocide to have committed, but I was only following orders. Well, what if you hadn't followed those orders?
Yeah, exactly.
I don't know. I suppose it's easy for us to sit here in peacetime and mull over what people should do. Well, the other thing that it puts in mind of the purpose of what is now the European Union, that was set up because wars start because of unequal access to scarce resources. That's why all conflict starts, unequal access to resources. So the whole point of having the European Union, or whatever, EEC as it started off, was, well, if we give everybody access to the resources, they won't need to fight about them. And, that has worked. I mean, there is alternatives to just building bigger and bigger stockpiles and firing them at each other, or waving bigger sticks and fire. The cooperation is possible.
Yeah, and I think that description of a way of thinking about it from the point of view of what's now the European Union. I mean, the other side of that is that people did have to in those original countries, and then the other ones that joined in, people did have to put behind them a whole history of having fought each other, and again and again and again, and built up empires, and then they collapse, and someone else trots up on his horse from Paris up to Berlin. I'm thinking about Napoleon. Well, he even got as far as Moscow. So people had to kind of lay that down.
It's complicated stuff, and I mean, we're sitting here really musing over it. I mean,
I know. Sometimes it's just quite good to muse over it, even although, at the back of, the forefront of you and I's mind at the moment is we know perfectly well we're not experts in this, but we're sort of fairly well read. Mm-hmm. So, if everyone who was fairly well read just did a bit of thinking about these things, it might end up helping. A balance might shift. Have we cheered you up watching this?
So you may be thinking, what are they rambling on about today? But I think it kind of puts in context why we bother to go and film. This will be the third year that we've filmed it, I think, possibly even the fourth. There's nothing greatly different happens from one year to the next, except another year is added to the anniversary. But that's why we give up our Saturdays to go and film it, because we think it matters that we remember that there's an alternative to what happened 81 years ago, and there's an alternative to what's sitting on the Clyde, and there's an alternative to the way the world is right now. And I think as the Rhys Crilley was saying, there's a different narrative.
Yeah, absolutely.
So,
well, I think you've just given a very good intro to the next part of the podcast.
So this is our footage from the Peace Garden in Glasgow. Hope you enjoy it.
This year's Glasgow CND's commemoration of the Hiroshima and Nagasaki bombings in 1945. This is the 81st year we're remembering these atrocities. We're here to remember it, to spread the word, to let people know, especially younger people, that it happened. It really happened. And it can happen again if we forget. So we must not forget. Before I hand you over to our illustrious speakers this morning, I would like to remember a couple of Glasgow CND stalwarts who died this past year. Firstly, Richard Phelps, who was there, always there, at the meetings, handing out leaflets, talking to people at conferences, whatever. He and his wife Sandra, who should be with us this morning, but I don't see her yet, I hope she makes it. Richard and Sandra were instrumental in involving Scottish CND, Glasgow CND, with the creation of this Peace Garden created by our Provost for Peace, Jacqueline McLaren. You hear from shortly. I'd also like to remember Brian Quayle, a hero of the movement. Brian was a polymath. He was a Latin teacher. He was a fan of Russian culture, but he was the most passionate speaker against nuclear war, nuclear bombs. He was an inspiration to us all. I'll personally remember him as the man who stopped a nuclear convoy by pressing the pedestrian crossing button. And amazingly the convoy stopped and he lay down in front of it. So thank you, Brian. Thank you, Richard. And thank you to all the CND members, and especially Glasgow CND members, who have given up their time to try and keep these memories alive. Thank you. I'd like to hand over now to Lord Provost of Glasgow, Jacqueline McLaren.
Thank you very much, Ian. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome. And thank you for joining us here today in the beautiful surroundings of Glasgow Botanic Garden. Each year, this commemoration provides an opportunity to pause and remember, to honour those who lost their lives in Hiroshima and Nagasaki, to acknowledge the suffering endured by so many, and to recognise the enduring importance of peace in our world. As we mark the 81st anniversary of the atomic bombings, it is particularly meaningful to gather here in Glasgow's Peace Garden. This time last year, we came together to unveil this space. 12 months on, the garden has become part of the fabric of our city, offering a place for quiet contemplation and serving as a reminder of the consequences of conflict and the value of peace. 1 year on, we can see that vision taking root. The purpose at the heart of this garden remains as relevant now as it was when it was first created. The tobacco trees growing here, descended from trees that survived the events of 1945, stand as extraordinary symbols of resilience and hope. As they continue to flourish, so too does this garden's role as a place of remembrance, learning and understanding. They remind us that even in the wake of devastation, life endures, communities can rebuild, and hope can prevail. My friends, before I close, I would like to thank everyone who has helped create and care for this special place over the past year. My thanks go to our various partners and the dedicated staff here at the Botanic Gardens. Your commitment has helped ensure that this garden continues to serve as a special space for learning, remembrance and quiet reflection for the people of Glasgow. We are also fortunate to have the expertise of our wonderful curator, Hiroshima, somewhere. Oh, he's over there. Whose family has a personal connection to the events we commemorate today. His knowledge and care have helped these remarkable trees and this garden to blossom. As we stand here 1 year on from the opening of the Peace Garden, let us consider not only the lessons of the past, but also our shared responsibility for the future. At a time when conflict continues to affect communities across the world, the message of this garden is a simple but powerful one. That peace should never be taken for granted, and that each of us has a role to play in promoting understanding and respect. Thank you all for joining us here today and for taking the time to remember. Thank you.
Very much, Provost. Samuel Rafanell-Williams, Administrator of Scottish CMD. Thanks, Sam.
Hello everyone. My name is, if you didn't hear Jean, my name is Samuel Rafanell-Williams and I'm with the Scottish Campaign for Nuclear Disarmament. Thank you all for being here today to commemorate the 81st anniversary of the atomic bombing of the Japanese city of Hiroshima on the 6th of August 1945, which indiscriminately killed almost 150,000 people. Between the bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, the latter of which took place only days after the first atomic massacre, around 230,000 people were killed, including 38,000 children. The harms of these bombings on those who survived have lasted for generations and are suffered to this day. Many of the Japanese and Korean atomic bomb survivors, known as the Hibakusha, have suffered chronic illnesses and had their lives sometimes cut tragically short by the dreadful long-term effects of ionizing radiation. Some such health effects are passed on intergenerationally to their children and grandchildren. Similar intergenerational harms have also been suffered not only by the Hibakusha, but by millions of people worldwide in Kazakhstan, Australia, Algeria, across the whole Pacific Island region, across the United States itself, and also suffered by British citizens as a consequence of the calamitous and unjust nuclear testing regime, which saw 2,050 nuclear bombs exploded by the nuclear armed states over several decades, many of them hundreds of times the strength of the Hiroshima bomb. And so today is not just the 81st anniversary of the first military use of nuclear weapons, but it marks 81 years of global nuclear harms and injustice and terror. Nuclear test explosions have since been banned, but nuclear weapons themselves are not yet universally outlawed, despite being definitionally indiscriminate weapons and therefore illegal to use, and arguably even to threaten to use under international law. But instead of acknowledging the immorality and criminality at the very foundation of the nuclear weapons regime, nuclear states have instead doubled down on the so-called deterrence policies of the Cold War, which, as well as failing to prevent violent conflict worldwide, have led humanity a hair's breadth from nuclear conflict on numerous occasions in the past 81 years. But there is another path that could be taken. The Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, adopted by the United Nations in 2017, this year reached the significant milestone of being signed by 100 countries, just over half of UN member states, and it continues to build momentum. This treaty, which comprehensively bans nuclear weapons for signatories, as well as mandating the remediation of nuclear victims worldwide, is proving to be the most promising path towards nuclear disarmament today, despite the egregious and irresponsible actions of the nuclear-armed states in recent years. Japanese and Korean Hibakusha nuclear survivors and other impacted communities have been at the very forefront of establishing this nuclear ban treaty and promoting it across the world. But their numbers are dwindling, with many survivors passing away every year. In a world in which nuclear weapons continue to threaten all of humanity, I believe civil society and peace-loving people in Scotland and beyond have a responsibility to take forward the Hibakusha struggle for justice and for a world finally free of nuclear weapons. I want to end by commending the efforts of Glasgow Campaign for Nuclear Disarmament, whose collaboration with the city helped to establish this wonderful peace garden right in the very heart of Glasgow Botanics. And with this initiative, Glasgow CND and the city have done a great service to the people of Glasgow by providing a site for regular commemorations, vigils, and other peace events for very many years to come, and hopefully for generations. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Simon. I'd now like to call Bill Kidd. Very honoured to have Bill here, the co-president of the International Organisation of Parliamentarians for Nuclear Proliferation and Disarmament. Thank you, Bill. It's a mouthful.
Thank you, and thanks to everybody for this taking place today. It's absolutely fabulous. I'd like to thank Glasgow CND and Glasgow's Provost of Peace here, and everyone who's taken part. I think it's absolutely brilliant. I think the idea of the ginkgo tree being planted here as well will be something that will last for generations to come, and that is something we all have to be proud of and look forward to. I'm Bill Kidd, former MSP, but I still, as was mentioned there, continue as co-president of the International Parliamentarians Organisation, PNND, which stands for Parliamentarians for Nuclear Non-Proliferation and Disarmament, which is why we call it PNND. And I'd just like to say that this is a symbol of what is taking place across the world. Actually, we here are part of a worldwide campaign against the existence of nuclear weapons, not just their use, but their existence. And as was mentioned about Kazakhstan, where I've got a lot of friends actually, Kazakhstan was part of the Soviet Union. At the time when the Soviet Union was exploding its test bombs, they did 456 of them in Kazakhstan in an area called Semipalatinsk. And there are still, to this day, 1.5 million people in Kazakhstan who suffer from the outcomes, not just those who were there at the time of the bombs, but their families as well. Including a friend of mine, Karabek Kuyukov, who is an artist who paints the most fabulous paintings. He has to hold the paintbrush in his mouth because he has no arms, and that is because his mother was affected by the nuclear explosions and the radioactivity when he was coming along, just before he was born. So I just wanted to mention that because it still exists today. So many people were killed, in my opinion, murdered, because they were civilians and they were living at home when these bombs in Hiroshima and Nagasaki were dropped on them. And I think that we need to remember them at all times. We also need to remember all those people who've been left with the devastation of the nuclear and radioactivity issues that they have in their countries around the world. We have to remember that, and we have to, as it's been said, we have to remember all those who were innocent of anything to do with these weapons, who have been damaged by them, and the people who want to continue with them. Because I was at the United Nations in April, May, and we had the conference there at that time, and there was a difficulty in the countries of the United Nations getting through how much it is important that we ban nuclear weapons from across the world. A number of countries stood together to stop that from being able to be banned. And those countries, some of them are enemies of each other. But my goodness, can they no half work together when it comes to keeping these things going? So I think we need to hold them up to everybody, needs to hold them up to the light so that we can all see these people who are in favour of this disgusting form of potential weaponry. The threats of it being used are something we should all remember, because threats normally sadly, do come to pass, so we need to stop it. I would just like to finish off by saying thank you to everybody who's here, because I think it's so important that we all do stand together, shoulder to shoulder, and be loud and get ourselves out there. And as it says on the banner here, like Brian Quayle, we can be doing, lying down in front of these things and stopping them, getting their trucks up and down the road. And Brian was a man of dignity and a man of honour. And he wasn't a troublemaker, he was someone that wanted to stop trouble. And that's why he did what he did. And I think we can all take that on board. Thank you all so much indeed.
Thank you much. And our final speaker for the moment is our own David Peutherer, leader of the Reclaim Our Clyde campaign and Glasgow CND stalwart.
When the British government recently announced a huge capital investment in Faslane Nuclear Base, various statements were made. One of them was Scotland is very much at the forefront of defending the UK. I don't know if that makes you feel safe, but it certainly doesn't make me feel safe. Because what was not said by any of the spokesmen is that the presence of nuclear weapons in the west of Scotland makes us a prime target for a nuclear attack on Faslane and Coalport. Why? Because the whole of Britain's submarine-based nuclear defence system is there. All the submarines, all the missiles, and all the bombs. The objective of an attack would surely be to make the bases unusable, so you can just wipe out the whole defence system of one of the 9 nuclear countries. Just 2 or perhaps 4 nuclear bombs could do so much damage that it might not be possible to arm and launch the submarines. Britain's submarine-based system could be rendered useless. Tens of thousands of people could be killed at Faslane and Coalport and across the Central Belt. Health services would be unable to cope, and huge damage could be done to the Scottish economy, and the effects could last for decades. My impression is that the British government is actually not much bothered about it. The scale and nature of the investment it's making in Faslane and Coalport shows that it's fully committed to retaining the bases and will unless they can be stopped. And if they're not, the weapons could be there for another 30 or more dangerous years. The only way they can be stopped is if enough of us in Scotland want it to be and vote accordingly. And that means voting for independence and the Scottish Government, which will sign the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. I don't think there is any other way. To do that, we need to give people a reason for wanting to do it. We believe they need to know about the dangers. It's their lives which are at risk. So what those of us who are active in the campaign do is tell them about the threat to their lives, the lives of their children, and grandchildren, and to our country. We do it at stalls on the streets, music and community festivals, and by talking to them when we give them leaflets, temporary tattoos. When we do that, we find that a very large proportion of people, particularly the young, know little or nothing about the nuclear weapons on the Clyde. When we tell them, they're really shocked and they agree that we should get rid of them. You can't expect people to vote for something if they don't know they're there. We're also making videos to go free online. Scripts are written, but we have no date yet when we'll be able to put them online. when they do, there'll be another way of reaching people and telling them about the dangers of the weapons on the river. Doing that is the way we can give them a reason to vote for independence and getting rid of the nuclear weapons. So my message to you today is tell people you know, young people, family, friends, colleagues, neighbours, that it doesn't have to be this way, that we can get rid of these most murderous weapons. And if you come to help us at our next stalls, even if just for a short time, they will be on the UN International Day of Peace on the 21st of September, and the UN Day for the Total Elimination of Nuclear Weapons, and Day for Global Action Against Nuclear Weapons on the 26th of September. It will be on Buchanan Street starting at 11:30 near the junction of Gordon Street. A good turnout of supporters will be much more impressive than just one wee beardy old man standing. You'll get an email about these things near the time. There is a song which I like. We sang it, or tried to sing it once at one of these events a few years ago. It's called "We Are the Human Miracle." The message of it is that we can make the world a better, safer place of free of nuclear weapons. We only have to try. So please keep trying, and I hope to see some of you in September. Thank you.
Thank you very much, David. Yes, very useful information there. You can find the times and dates and places of all the Reclaim the Clyde stalls on their Facebook page, and as David said, we'll be sending out emails as well. We really would appreciate a bit of help. We're struggling, and we know that many, many more people believe in what we're doing and want to get this message across and actually appear on the streets. You need only take, 20 minutes, half an hour of your time? Please come and help. Our Provost for Peace is going to be assisting Dr. Hiroshima in planting out one of the ginkgo tree saplings grown from the seeds of the tree that survived the Hiroshima blast. This is a very august occasion, and you're all invited to stay and see that. Okay? Thank you. Right. Protest in Harmony Glasgow.
Sow seeds of hope wherever you go, though some may fall on stony ground. Sow seeds of hope wherever you go, some of the seeds gonna grow taller than you ever could know. Sow seeds of hope wherever you go, though some may fall on stony ground. Sow seeds of hope wherever you go, some of the seeds gonna grow taller than you ever could know. Sow seeds of hope wherever you go, though some may fall on stony ground. Sow seeds of hope wherever you go, some of the seeds gonna grow taller than you ever could know. Sow seeds of hope wherever you go, though some may fall on stony ground. Sow seeds of hope wherever you go, those seeds are grow.
Thanks for listening, everybody. I hope you enjoyed that. If you want to make sure you're following us and subscribe to us, then you get notified every time we put something new out, so you don't miss anything. That would be great. Also, you can click the little bell if you're watching on YouTube.
And sign up for our mailing list. You can do that from the website, and we always send one out at the beginning of each month to tell you what's happening. Last but not least, you can buy us a coffee on coffee.com.